everyone can come on in. Okay, welcome everyone. So it is 12 noon, and welcome to the final installment of our Omer study. We are each week studying a different book of Nach, books from the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings. And today on our final installment, we are going to be looking at the book of Ruth, which is appropriate as we are coming up to Shavuot tomorrow night. The book of Ruth is traditionally read on Shavuot, so we thought it would be a good place for us to land at the end of these weeks of Nach study together during the counting of the Omer. And as we are still in, just barely, still in the counting of the Omer, I'm going to turn things over to my esteemed colleague, Rabbi Michael Bernholtz, who's going to lead us in the blessing for the counting of the Omer.
Now, as we have been counting as a group, this is a group experience in that Rabbi Emily Losben, who is the other teacher today, is the one doing the screen sharing. And so I'm going to be reading off the screen that she is presenting for you. Hineni, but I can't see, so you know. Don't mind me. Hineni muchan, muzuman lekayam mitzvat aseh shel svirata omer. I'm ready to fulfill the mitzvah of the counting of the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al svirata Omer. Our praise to you, Adonai, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot and commands us to count the Omer. Today is the 48th day, which is pretty extraordinary because that is 6 weeks and 6 days in the Omer. We are approaching the 7th week of the Omer as we are counting up, and we will soon have a Shavuot, a week of weeks, 49 days into 50 days, that will then take us into our observance of Shavuot. I'm clearly planning too many holidays all at once. We're up to Shavuot, which will start tomorrow night at sundown. As Rabbi Ostrov shares a few pieces of text of blessing to welcome us in, I'm going to put into the chat, first of all, the information about a Tikkun Leil Shavuot. There is a Tikkun Leil Shavuot happening virtually starting tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern, and then we'll be going through the night. There's you'll be able to choose all sorts of different teachings, and it is really pretty marvelous that we can offer it. And then I'll also share the link for the playlist so you can see. I have not posted last week's class. My apologies for that, but I will be doing that in this week's class later this week, so that you'll be able to watch all of these or share all of these classes if you, we hope you have been enjoying them. So I'm going to put that information and turn it over to Rabbi Losben-Ostrov to share some blessing with us.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Very excited to be with you all. And so the first blessing is our blessing for study. And so I'm going to invite you, if you'd like to come off mute. My favorite way of doing these blessings through Zoom is for me to say a few words and then everyone repeats it. And it's the best way to kind of say it. So feel free to unmute yourself and we'll do this together. Baruch atah Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai.
Eloheinu melech haolam.
Eloheinu melech haolam.
Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav. Vitzivanu la'asok. V'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah, and for that let us all say,
Amen.
Amen.
And for those of you who know me, and I know I have a few of my congregants here, I am a little bit stereotypical when it comes to certain Reform rabbis who love any excuse to say a shehechianu, any excuse to thank God for allowing us to reach the very moment that we are in. I happen to have a bit of a bias. My friend Loli Clara, who's with us today, officially completed her conversion yesterday. So that, of course, is a Shehechianu moment. And it's one for all of us because we get to celebrate with her. But for me, it's also a Shehechianu moment that we're together and that I have this opportunity to teach both my congregants and friends, as well as some of you whom I've never met, as we've spanned the entire country and come together. And it's a Shehechianu moment too, because this is our last session. And wanted to ask everyone just to take a moment as you've done the wave and just do a wave for our friend Rabbi Bernholtz, who put all of this together for us. So he's a mensch, and this has been really, for me, so wonderful to have this opportunity to learn and to offer learns, and we've been able to have it as asynchronous. So with that, let's do a Shehechianu, and then Rabbi Goldwasser and I are going to jump right into one of our favorite texts. You know, Rabbi Goldwasser, I also have a habit of saying, this is my favorite, and this is my favorite, and this is my favorite. But I can really promise you that Ruth is really up there in the real favorites. So friends, let's do the Shehechianu together one more time. Please, again, let's repeat after me a few words at a time. Baruch atah Adonai.
Baruch
Baruch
atah
Adonai.
Adonai.
Eloheinu melech haolam.
Eloheinu melech haolam.
Haolam.
Shehechianu.
Shehechianu.
V'kiyamanu.
V'kiyamanu.
V'higianu.
V'higianu.
Lazman hazeh.
Losben-Ostrov.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of all, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this time as we can study together as Am Yisrael, as one people from wherever we are. And let us say Amen.
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 All right. And now I'm going to switch it to Rabbi Goldwasser, who's going to put something up on the screen. And Rabbi Goldwasser, if it's okay with you, I would like to also kind of put the call out for some of our readers. Is that okay while you're pulling that up?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. So I want to move pretty quickly through this because we've got a lot of text to read together and discuss. And when Rabbi Losben-Ostrov says that this is a favorite text, this really is. I mean, for anyone, I think, who really loves studying the Hebrew Bible, the book of Ruth has to be a favorite because the book of Ruth itself loves the Hebrew Bible. And that's one of the ways that we're going to be looking at this text today. So we're going to look at the text through two different lenses. First, we're going to look at the text itself and see how multi-layered it is. The book of Ruth is distinct in that it is aware of much of the rest of the Bible, certainly of the Torah, and it loves the Torah, and it plays with the Torah. And throughout the book of Ruth, there are all these references to other texts in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the Torah, and it's playing with the Torah. So in order to really understand what's going on in the story, you need to be able to unpack those layers. You need to be able to see how the book of Ruth is referring to other parts of the Bible. That's the first part of what we're going to be doing today. Then the second half of what we're going to be doing is we're going to be thinking about, well, all right, so what does that give us in terms of a story that's about real human experience, about the nature of relationships, the nature of humanity, of how one person treats another, and about how we find meaning in our relationships, because the book of Ruth is definitely all about that too. So we are going to get started. I'm going to share my screen with you.
And as Rabbi Goldwasser is sharing, you know, some of the books in the Bible can be quite long. This is one of the shorter ones. And in fact, this is an opportunity. We're going to read the entire thing today. And we're going to ask for 4 volunteers, 1 to read each chapter. And as you look at this awesome presentation, you'll see that Rabbi Goldwasser has aligned it so that the text of Ruth is on the left-hand side, and on the right is some commentary to bring up, as well as other places. In a way, it's similar for those of you who have looked at the Talmud, how the Talmud is in the middle, and then all the stuff to help explain it is around it. So this is kind of a tipping of the hat to that, I will say, Rabbi Goldwasser. But I need 4 volunteers. We need 4 volunteers, each who's willing to read a chapter. If you don't volunteer, be careful, because I am ruthless. Get it? Ruthless. And I will, I didn't even think of that before. And I will just pick one up. Okay. Maggie has offered to volunteer and Jim has offered to volunteer. So we've got 2 so far. So Maggie, let's have you go first. Loli raised her hand. So Maggie, Jim, and Loli, and someone, you have time to pick a 4th, or we'll pick on you. So Maggie, Jeff, any other instruction for Maggie as she starts?
No, let's just jump right in and start reading the text. I'm going to ask you to read the whole of chapter 1, and then we're going to come back. We're going to spend a little time inspecting it and understanding the different layers within it.
Okay. The book of Ruth, chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were named Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Then those 2, Mahlon and Chilion, also died. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. She started out with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. From the country of Moab, she had heard that Adonai had taken note of God's people and given them food. Accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where they had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house. May Adonai deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May Adonai grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband." And she kissed them farewell. They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you, on their account, debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of Adonai has struck out against me." They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more, Adonai, do to me, if anything but death parts me from you." When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the 2 went on until they reached Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" "Do not call me Naomi," she replied. "Call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and Adonai has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when Adonai has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me?" Thus Naomi returned from the land of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law, Ruth the Moabite. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really very well read. What I want to do before we start diving into the annotations here is just to ask a very simple question. Is there anything that you don't understand? Is there anything that's unclear to you about what's going on in the text? speak up now. Now is a really great time to ask any clarifying questions about what's actually happening in the story. We're good? Okay. So I want to go back to the beginning of chapter 1 and look at some key passages that are referring to other things that the text expects you to know about in the Hebrew Bible. The very first thing that calls attention to itself at the beginning of the book of Ruth is it places it at a specific time. It says it was at the time when the judges ruled. Now, today, if I ask most people, when did the judges rule, or what do you know about the time when the judges rule, I'm not sure that they would have a particular image. But the Hebrew Bible does have a very particular image about what it means when it talks about the time when the judges ruled. This is the time after Moses and Joshua and before the establishment of the kingdom. So it's before King Saul, followed by King David. And that is generally described in the book of Judges as a time of upheaval, as a time of a little bit of anarchy over the people of the 12 tribes of Israel. The book of Judges itself is a pretty bloody and disgusting book, to put it nicely, where there is a tremendous amount of chaos and a sense of leaderlessness. The one strong leader that we get in the book of Judges, interestingly enough, is Deborah, a woman. But otherwise, it's a pretty nasty time. And the book of Judges actually ends on a note that conveys that point. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did as he pleased. And when the book ends saying everyone did as he pleased, it does not mean it in the positive way. It means it in the way of there is chaos, there is lawlessness in the land. So the book of Ruth starts itself off by saying, this is a story about a time when people may have known the law, but they didn't follow the law. This is a time of when Israel was not bound to the Torah the way that it ought to be. And that sets the background for the whole book. Okay, another thing, we hear in the story that that Naomi and her husband Elimelech, they lived in the country of Moab. And the name Moab may not mean very much to us today. You might know that Moab was a nation that was on the other side of the Jordan River from the land of Israel. But there's one very specific association that the Hebrew Bible has with the nation of Moab, and that is the story of how the nation of Moab came to be founded according to a legendary story that we find in the book of Genesis. And that is that, yeah, go ahead.
And in fact, I'll add, Rabbi Goldwasser,
You're
that is
done.
actually
Yeah.
one of
And she doesn't get to be
all of the stories in Genesis. This is the story of Lot's daughters. And if you see the note there that Lot's daughters raped him after their father had offered to give them over to rapists, we could spend a whole time just talking about this disturbing story. But the long and short of it is that because their daughters became pregnant by their father, who they had seduced and gotten drunk, you'll see right there in the second quote, the older one bore a son and named him Moab.
Right.
How crazy is it that this is the connection? It's almost disturbing, or is it later redemptive? So,
Right.
Rabbi Goldwasser, I just wanted to chime that in.
That's good. So we'll see throughout the book, Ruth is constantly being referred to as Ruth the Moabite, and with all that name suggests about her. So she is seen from the beginning and throughout the story as someone who is in some ways misbegotten, because the entire Moabite nation is misbegotten because of this sin of the daughters of Lot seducing and raping their father. Okay, let's go on from there. There's this mention that all right, so just one other thing about Moabites. There's a very specific text in the book of Deuteronomy that mentions the fact that Moabites are not allowed to be permitted into the congregation of God. And the way that is understood generally in Jewish tradition is it's a prohibition against intermarriage with Moabites. The Moabites are not allowed to marry Israelites. They cannot be accepted into the community of the Jewish community. And of course, that's going to play a very significant role in the story, a prohibition against marrying Moabites, in a book where Ruth is going to end up marrying an Israelite. We have this mention again in the first chapter that Elimelech's two sons, Naomi's two sons, married Moabite women. So there's a taint to that they did something that isn't permitted. They married Moabite women. But when you're living in Moab, when you raise your kids in Moab, what do you expect them to do but marry Moabites?
Sounds familiar, right, Rabbi Goldwasser?
Sounds familiar. Sounds like something we might be experiencing in America today. So the text goes out of its way to say that Naomi is left without her two sons and without her husband. So she is very much alone in the world as the story begins, except that she has these two daughters-in-law whom she wouldn't expect to be loyal to her. After all, she's not a blood relation of theirs. They're Moabites. She's an Israelite. And it also calls to attention something that we're going to be talking about a lot, which is the law of levirate marriage. Just give me a show of hands. Who here knows what I'm talking about when I talk about the law of levirate marriage? Okay, so let me explain it. When we go to the book of Deuteronomy, we're going to see that there's a law there that says, when brothers dwell together and one of them dies and leaves no offspring, the wife of the deceased shall not become that of another party outside the family. Her husband's brother shall unite with her, and she shall take as her wife and perform the levir's duty. Now, the word levir, it's an obscure Jewish word. It's an obscure word in English, but basically it means brother-in-law, daughter-in-law. Brother-in-law, sister-in-law. So the upshot of this law is, if a man is married to a woman and he dies before he produces offspring, the widow will then be married to the brother of the dead man. That is to say, it becomes the obligation of a person, when your brother dies and he was married and he didn't have any children, you are obliged as the man to marry your brother's widow and produce offspring that will not be counted as your children, but will be counted as the offspring of your dead brother. Now, to us in modernity, that seems like the weirdest law we've ever heard. Why would anyone require anything like that? But you should know, it actually was a law that was practiced in many civilizations in the ancient Near East and was understood as being this strange duty that people had to perpetuate the names of the dead so that your brother's name will not be lost. You have to marry his widow and produce offspring for your dead brother.
And
Questions?
just to be clear, remember in our story, in our history, that men could have more than one wife. So we think of, Jacob with both Rachel and Leah. So having a second wife wasn't at all the problem here. The goal was to make sure that a brother does his brotherly service by making sure that the brother's name continues on.
Right. So it's really important to get this because the whole story doesn't make sense without understanding that law. Any questions or concerns about the levirate marriage and what that is? Okay. So knowing what levirate marriage is makes this verse make a lot more sense. Naomi says to her two daughters, "Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house. May Adonai deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me." What Naomi is really saying here is, you've done your duty. You've done what you needed to done for my two sons who died. It's time for you to go home. No one else is going to come to marry you. These two men who died they're no more brothers. There's no one who's going to have to fulfill the obligation of levirate marriage by marrying you and producing an offspring for your dead husbands. Go home now is the undertone, is the hidden message in Naomi saying, you've already dealt with the dead. Get it? Moving along, again, so Naomi mentions, have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? Which, if you didn't understand the context of Levirate marriage, might sound weird. Why is she saying that? But she's actually making a legal point. She's saying, you don't have to wait for me to produce more sons who will then be obliged to marry you in order to fulfill the Levirate marriage duty. You don't have to do that. I'm not having any more sons, so go home, is the upshot of what she's saying there. And again, while we have this story about Naomi telling her daughter-in-laws to go home, Orpah, one of the daughters-in-law, goes home, and Naomi urges Ruth to go by saying to her, see, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law. Again, this is urging her not to be concerned about the law of Levirate marriage. There's another thing that you should know about Moab to complete this context for the story. There's a story in the book of Numbers. We have it right here, up here. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the men profaned themselves by whoring with the Moabite women who invited the men to go to the sacrifices for their God. The menfolk partook of them and worshiped that God. So there's another piece of context here that we should say about the associations with Moab. So Moab in ancient Israel has an association of being associated with women of loose morals, women who are going to pull men away from the worship of God, and who are going to entice men into worshiping foreign gods. That's part of the association with Moab in ancient Israel. It's part of the association that the Hebrew Bible has with Moabite women. So not only are Moabite women thought of as being misbegotten, but they're also thought of as being these loose women who are going to, prostitute themselves, who are going to lure men into misconduct, sexual misbehavior, and also lure them into the worship of foreign gods. That's part of the background of the book as well.
I'm going to jump in and just say something a little bit different.
Okay.
We see what this very passionate speech that many of us know about Ruth and what she says in terms of wanting to stay to Naomi, and we kind of credit that as a piece of conversion and one of the most powerful, most beautiful pieces of conversion. And we'll hopefully get to talk a little bit about that towards the end of our time together. But I want to just show, Rabbi Goldwasser pointed out a number of times where Naomi kept saying, go, go, go. And some of you may know that that's also part of the tradition. If you want to become Jewish, you're supposed to go to the rabbi 3 times, and the rabbi's supposed to say no, no, no. And if you keep coming back, then there's this notion of authenticity. Now, while Rabbi Goldwasser and I might not actually slam the door in people's faces when they come to us wanting to convert, you actually see this in a way from Naomi, who has said it in 3 different ways. Leave for this reason, leave for that reason, leave for this reason. So there's an interesting connection even here to what would later become the standard minhag or custom by the rabbis much later on.
Very good. So I want to point out, part of what the book is setting up here is a conflict in the law. There are 2 different Jewish laws that are in conflict in the book, and in some ways, the book of Ruth is almost like a legal treatise in narrative form about how we resolve conflicts in the law. The 2 laws that are in conflict with each other are the law of levirate marriage, which says that Ruth has to stay with Naomi because she needs to marry a son of Naomi or a close kin of Naomi in order to fulfill the law of levirate marriage. The other law that's in its conflict is the law that prohibits a Moabite from entering into the congregation of Israel. There's no direct way of resolving the conflict between those 2 laws. And that conflict, that legal conflict, is part of what drives the narrative of the story. It's the conflict that's at the center of the book, which isn't obvious if you're not familiar with the text that it's referring to, but it's there. Just to finish up the first chapter, very interestingly, and we're gonna hear this again at the end of the book, when Naomi enters into the city, into Bethlehem, she's greeted by people who remember her from before she left, and she says to them, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. I went away full, and Adonai has brought me back empty." Now that's a verse that's going to resonate throughout the rest of the book. What is she actually saying? Don't call me Naomi. The name Naomi means pleasant. Rather, you should call me Mara. Why Mara? She just liked the name Mara? No, she's referring to the fact that the name Mara, which is a name in ancient Israel, has the meaning of bitterness. And so she's saying, I went away full. I was Naom. I was pleasant and fulfilled when I left, but now I am coming back without a husband, without any sons. I am coming back bitter and empty. And it's almost as if here at the end of the first chapter, she doesn't even recognize Ruth's existence. She doesn't say, terrible things have happened to me, but look at this fantastic, loyal daughter-in-law I have who's come back with me. She completely ignores her and just says, I come back empty. I have nothing. And she, implying that Ruth means nothing to her. Any thoughts or questions before we go on to chapter 2? Okay, let's move on.
We did get a good comment in the chat, so I just want to encourage people to keep writing in the chat as well if you have any comments. And Jim, I think you were our volunteer to read for us in chapter 2.
Yes. Could you bring it up a little bit higher?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Now, Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, I would like to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone who may show me kindness. Yes, daughter, go, she replied, and off she went. She came and gleaned in a field, behind the reapers, and as luck would have it, it was a piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was of Elimelech's family. Presently, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. He greeted the reapers, Adonai be with you. And they responded, Adonai bless you. Boaz said to the servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose girl is that? The servant in charge of the reapers replied, she is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been on her feet ever since she came this morning. She has rested but little in the hut. Boaz said to Ruth, listen to me, daughter. Don't go to glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere, but stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you. And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water that the men have drawn. She prostrated herself with her face to the ground and said to him, why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner? Boaz said in reply, I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before. May Adonai reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from Adonai, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. She answered, you are most kind, my lord, to comfort me and to speak gently to your maidservant, though I am not so much as one of your maidservants. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here and partake of the meal, and dip your morsel in the vinegar. So she sat down beside the reapers. He handed her roasted grain, and she ate her fill and had some left over. When she got up again to glean, Boaz gave orders to his workers. You are not only to let her glean among the sheaves without interference, but you must also pull some stalks out of the heaps and leave them for her to glean, and not scold her. She gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned. It was about an ephah of barley, and carried it back with her to the town. When her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and when she also took out and gave her what she had left over after eating her fill, her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be, blessed be he who took such generous notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law whom she had worked with, saying, "The name of the man with whom I worked today is Boaz." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of Adonai, who has not failed in kindness to the living or to the dead." For, Naomi explained to her daughter-in-law, "the man is related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen." Ruth the Moabite said, "He even told me, 'Stay close by my workers until all my harvest is finished.'" And Naomi answered her daughter-in-law Ruth, "It is best, daughter, that you go out with his groves and not be annoyed in some other field." So she stayed close to the maidservants of Boaz and gathered until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished. Then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law.
Okay, thank you very much. Chapter 2. Again, same question as before. Any basic questions about the meaning of the text? What's going on here? Any clarity that we need about the story? Okay, so there are a couple of more laws that are being referred to in the story that we need to understand. First of all, the text makes a big deal about the fact that Boaz is a close relative of Elimelech, Naomi's late husband. And why does that matter? Well, because there's a law in the book of Leviticus that talks about if one of your kin is in straits and has to sell part of a holding, the nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what the relative has sold. There's an idea, not just in ancient Israel, but in the ancient Near East in general, that people have an obligation to buy out their close relatives if they end up in a time of dire straits. So Naomi is praising Boaz in the text because he gets it. He knows what his obligations are. He knows what his duties are. So his kindness to Ruth, Naomi is reading that as he is fulfilling his obligation as a close relative. That's why Naomi urges her, don't go gleaning in anyone else's field. Stay in Boaz's field because he can fulfill the promise of helping us get through our destitute state. And he is somebody who recognizes his obligations.
Which is akin, which again is akin to what we were talking about in the first chapter of this idea of family connecting and redeeming and keeping us being able to stay connected. And again, remember here you have a woman and now her daughter-in-law who's with her. They have no way of taking care of themselves. So this idea of the gleaning is huge. We also don't really know how old Naomi was. We could guess, based on the age of her sons and how long they were married, but we also don't know what her ability is physically to go out and reap from the harvest. And Rabbi Goldwasser, if you'll permit me, this is one of my favorite verses in all of Torah, one of our most important commandments. If you're looking, everyone, on the right hand of the page, you'll see the second one. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, Adonai, am your God. And that is, to me, one of the most important ways that we live as Jews in saying, you know what, we need not to take the full harvest, but in order to really have a full harvest, that means we take what we need for ourselves as well as leaving for others. And if we do it in this way, by leaving the corners elsewhere, or by not reaping what, it falls on the ground, leaving that, it's also a way of giving a little bit of, I don't know if I'd say honor, but at least not embarrassing someone who comes by and saying, here's a handout, here's what I'm giving you. Instead, they know that they can come and take what they need. And it's so much here that they're even adding extra to take care of them. I am, and I hope some of you might be as well, a little disturbed by the fact that Boaz actually has to say, don't interfere, don't molest. And so, that also kind of gives us a nice little piece to the time, which reminds us how much at risk a woman like Ruth would have been trying to take care of herself in what other men could have done to her. So this wasn't necessarily an easy time for her and or for Naomi. So just kind of letting everyone have a glimpse into what life was like too.
I want to move a little bit quickly because I want to make sure we have time for all that we want to cover. Just want to point out a couple more things here in chapter 2. One, notice that Boaz asks this question, whose girl is that? There are at least 3 times in the book of Ruth where people referring to Ruth say, who is that? Who are you? Comes up over and over again. I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind for understanding the book as a whole. Just also this other simple exchange between Ruth and Boaz that seems like it's just a little kind of pleasantry, a little bit of polite talk, but I think it has deeper significance. Ruth, after she sees the kindness that Boaz is showing to her, she says to him, why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner? People keep referring to Ruth as Ruth the Moabite. Here in this story, the reapers say, oh, that Moabite woman. So she is very self-aware of the fact that she is a foreigner and that people are treating her as a foreigner, which makes her even more vulnerable. But Boaz has an interesting response to her. He says, I've been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband. So Boaz seems to be recognizing she might be a Moabite, but she's following our laws better than most of our own people do. She is remaining loyal to her dead husband by staying with Naomi. And maybe that's also triggering his thought, if this Moabite, if this foreigner is following our laws, maybe I need to be following our laws too, because I am a close relative. I am the person who has an obligation to redeem this woman and perhaps also even to marry this woman because of the law of levirate marriage. Again, I want to move quickly through here.
Jeff, as we move now on to chapter 3 to make sure we get through it, I want to just say there was a question Sandra asked in the text about why daughters are called maidservants. And I think the connotation here is when we're talking about maidservants, these are really the women who are in charge of collecting. So there is an actual element of them being servants in this case too.
Right. So I'm glad you raised that, because there is an interesting thing here where Ruth has this kind of, it sounds like just polite banter, but again, there's deeper meaning. She says to Boaz, you are most kind, my lord, to comfort me and to speak gently to your maidservant. She refers to herself, but then she says, though I'm not so much as one of your maidservants. And it seems to me that there's a double meaning in here when she says, I'm actually not your maidservant, because she's vulnerable and she recognizes that she doesn't know exactly what Boaz's intentions are, but he seems to be nice to her. But she's reminding him, I don't have any obligations to you. I'm not your maidservant. And I'm not your employee. You have no claim over me, because she's in a vulnerable situation. And we might as well address the fact that she is in a sexually vulnerable position. Boaz himself tells the men who work for him not to molest her. She is in a position where she could easily be raped in this situation or taken advantage of. And maybe her saying, hey, look, buddy, I don't work for you. I have no obligations to you, might be a way of kind of self-protecting herself from any assumptions that Boaz might have. I think
also protecting, but also letting him know, wait a minute, you can look at me that way too because of that. So I think it plays into both ways for sure.
Right. If you have any bad intentions, let's keep it within the scope of the law. Seems to be one way of understanding it. Okay, I think we need to move on to chapter 3. Who is our reader for chapter 3?
Loli is our reader for chapter 3, and We still will take a volunteer for chapter 4, and we want to be conscious of the time. So we hope that you're enjoying all of this, and we definitely want to get through the book. But Rabbi Goldwasser, we can also share this awesome annotation with people for them to dig into it on their own. What we don't
I'll
get
put a
through.
link for that in the chat.
Great. Okay, so Loli, I'm going to ask you to unmute and read fast-ish as so that we can.
Yeah. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "Daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. Now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you are to do." She replied, "I will do everything you tell me." She went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. Boaz ate and drank, and in a cheerful mood went to lie down beside the grain pot. Then she went over stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. There was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked, and she replied, "I'm your handmaid, Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman." He exclaimed, "Be blessed of Adonai, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first. Is greater than the first, in that you have not turned to younger men, whether poor or rich. And now, daughter, have no fear. I will do in your behalf whatever you ask. For all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. But while it is true I am a redeeming kinsman, there is another redeemer closer than I. Stay for the night. Then in the morning, if he will act as a redeemer, good, let him redeem. But if he does not want to act as redeemer for you, I will do so myself, as Adonai lives. Lie down until morning." Is there anything else?
Yep.
Okay. So she lay at his feet until dawn. She rose before one person could distinguish another, for he thought, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Hold out the shawl you're wearing." She held it while he measured out 6 measures of barley, and he put it on her back. When she got back to the town, she came to her mother-in-law, who asked, "Who are you, daughter?" She told her all that the man had done for her, and she added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, 'Do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" And Naomi said, "Stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today."
Thank you so much for reading that. Okay, I'm going to ask the question again, and this time I'm expecting a different answer. What don't you understand in this story? What's going on in the text that is unclear to you? Now, I ask that as somewhat of this time as somewhat of a pointed question, because in chapter 3, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of lack of clarity about what's actually happening. So somebody tell me, what's the big question that is unanswered in the text?
Whether they had relations or not during the night.
Okay, I'm just going to call it sex.
Sex, okay.
Okay. Yeah, there's an open question about whether or not, and believe me, volumes have been written about this question. What actually happened on the threshing floor? One thing that I'll say seems clear to me is that Naomi's intention is to, when she tells Ruth, go and find Boaz on the threshing floor and uncover his feet, parentheses, feet in biblical Hebrew is often used as a euphemism for genitals. It is Naomi's intention that Ruth should seduce Boaz, have sex with Boaz, and therefore make him obligated to treat Ruth as what she will then be, his wife.
Compromise. Yeah.
Well, it's not so much compromising, it's more fulfilling an obligation.
Okay,
In ancient Israel, and in ancient,
right.
a man has sex with a woman, they be married folk now. And that he would then have an obligation to treat her as a wife and to fully redeem her. That seems to be Naomi's intention in the story. And she says to him, uncover his feet.
And Ruth goes willingly. It's important to note there's no objection from Ruth to follow what her mother-in-law is telling her to do.
Right. And she actually says, I will do everything that you told me to do.
Right.
But when she actually gets down to the threshing floor, and the whole conversation we could have about what the threshing floor means, but let's just leave it at is an important thing that happens during the harvest, and it's customary for people to be sleeping outside during the harvest with the grain that they're harvesting. She comes to him, and he immediately says to her, who are you? Again, remember that question keeps coming up over and over again throughout the story. And she replies, I am your handmaid, Ruth. Remember before when she said, I'm not so much as your handmaid? Here she's saying, okay, I'm fessing up. I am your handmaid. You are the closest relation. You have an obligation to take care of me. I came here, I was sent by my mother-in-law to seduce you, but I don't need to seduce you. I'm already your near relative. You already know what your obligation is to me. I think that's one way of interpreting what's going on here in the story. She says, go ahead.
I want to say another thing too, and then answer Maggie's question, which is, yes, she's saying who she is, but there's also a little bit of, if you scroll up just a little bit, Rabbi Goldwasser, when she comes down, she is bathed, she's anointed, she's dressed up. She's not going to look and appear and smell exactly the way she did earlier when he saw her. So there is also, I think there's an element of consent here where he's saying, tell me who you are. But also I think there's like, who are you? I want to read it in this, like, who are you? This isn't the same scruffy girl who was with me the other day. So while he may very well likely know who she is, it is possible that there's a slightly different element to that. So I want to, which is why Rabbi Goldwasser and I are going back and forth about this, right? This is so awesome to have different, potentially different ways to see it. Maggie, your question that came up, you're exactly right. And that's what I bet Rabbi Goldwasser was just about to say, which is that if she were to lay with him, use that word, and there was someone else who was closer, which we're going to see in a second, or we read that, who was closer, then that would be a violation. So they have to, so yes, we're getting to that other man.
Right. So I think we should just move right on to chapter 4 and try and resolve all of these conflicts in the text. So who's our reader for chapter 4?
Okay, real quick, do we have a volunteer? Okay, Anne, please.
Meanwhile, Boaz had gone down to the gate and sat down there. And now the Redeemer, whom Boaz had mentioned, passed by. He called, come over and sit down here, so-and-so. And he came over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, be seated here. And then he sat down. He said to the Redeemer, Naomi, now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to our kinsman, Elimelech. I know that's not close. It's close. Elimelech, thanks, Rabbi. I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquire it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you will not redeem, tell me that I may know. For there is no one to redeem but you and I come after you. I'm willing to redeem it, he replied. Boaz continued, when you acquire the property from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate. The Redeemer replied, Then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. You take over my right of redemption, for I am unable to exercise it. Now this was formally done in Israel in cases of redemption or exchange. To validate any transaction, one man must take off his sandal and hand it to the other. Such was the practice in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Acquire for yourself," he drew off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and to the rest of the people, "You are my witnesses today that I am acquiring for Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. I am also requiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, as my wife, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen and from the gate of his hometown. You are witnesses today." All the people at the gate and the elders answered, "We are. May Adonai make the women who is coming into your house, like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel, prosper in Ephratah, and perpetuate your name in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offsprings which Adonai will give you by this young woman." Can you move it up a little? So Boaz, thank you. So Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife, and he cohabitated with her. Adonai let her conceive, and she bore a son. And the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be Adonai, who has not withheld a redeemer from you today. May his name be perpetuated in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you your old age, for he is born of your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons." Naomi took the child and held it in her bosom. She became its foster mother, and the women neighbors gave him a name, saying, "A son is born to Naomi. The name is Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." This line of Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begat Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for reading. We need to take it home pretty quickly because we still have some other stuff we need to do. But I just want to make 2 important points about the end of the story. First of all, this list of begots at the end of the story, when we read the Hebrew Bible, we're very used to just ignoring those, thinking that they're not important. This one is incredibly important because what is this showing? This is showing that Boaz is a descendant of Perez. And Perez is the son of Tamar. We're going to get to Tamar in a moment. But this whole line ends up with David. That is King David. That is the man who will also be the ancestor of the Messiah to come. The redemption of the world depends upon this lineage. Is an incredibly important point at the end of the book. Now, I want to go back a little bit and just look at one section right here about the blessing that is given to Ruth and Naomi upon the birth of Ruth's son. The people say to her, "May Adonai make the woman who is coming into your house," meaning Ruth, "like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel." They're saying, "Oh, may you be abundant and prosperous and have lots of children." But there's a hidden agenda in that line as well. Rachel and Leah, what's the relationship between Rachel and Leah?
Sisters.
They are sisters to each other. And they're also co-wives to Jacob. They're both wives of Jacob. There is a law in the Torah that forbids a man to marry a woman and her sister in the lifetime of them. The marriage between Jacob and Leah and Rachel is a violation of biblical law. The Torah never mentions that. But here in the book of Ruth, there is a slight reference to it. It's like, not every law needs to be obeyed. And sometimes breaking the law is better than keeping the law. Because remember, this entire book is based on a conflict between the law of Levirate marriage and the law forbidding a Moabite from entering into the community of Israel. Something's got to give. And here at the end of the book, there's this reference to the fact that sometimes you need to break the law. The other thing that's referred to is, may your house be like the house of Peretz, whom Tamar bore to Judah. We don't have time right now to go through the whole story of Judah and Tamar, but we'll just say Judah and Tamar are father-in-law and daughter-in-law who conceive, who have sex and produce a child who is the ancestor of Boaz. Peretz is at the top of the lineage here. So Boaz himself comes from a misbegotten lineage. Does that sound familiar? Both Boaz and Ruth both come from lineages that have illicit sex built into them, and they co-redeem each other in the end of the story. And that co-redemption leads to the redemption of the entire world, because they become the ancestors of King David, who will be the ancestor of Mashiach, of the Redeemer of the entire world. So there's a lot of complex stuff going on in here. What is the book ultimately saying about law? Seems to be saying about sometimes the law is there to serve a good, and sometimes the law gets in the way. The important thing isn't to follow the letter of the law, but to understand the deeper meaning and spirit of the law. And I'm going to leave it at that, because I think there is a few other things we want to do before we finish up.
So if everyone's willing to give us just a few more minutes, because you just heard beautiful ways about talking about the letter of the law. But one of the last things Rabbi Goldwasser just said was how amazing that two individuals who come from these illicit relationships would go on to lead the people to come together to actually redeem, and not only redeem us, but individually we can say that each of them were redeemed, which I think is a nice reminder for all of us. It doesn't necessarily matter where you come from. It matters who you are and what you do. And that brings us a little bit to the incredibly powerful spiritual side of this story as well. I'm going to share one of my absolute favorite songs, videos. It's about the story. It sums it up. Some of you may have heard it before. I'd like you to take a listen, and then we'll just take a few minutes after that to kind of sum all of this up on a bit of a spiritual level, because we are now leading into our spiritual revelation as well when we come into Shavuot tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share this song. It is a video for Shavuot on the story of Ruth. I'm going to start it, and then everyone, if you'll just give me a thumbs up that you can hear it, and that will be great. Here we go. 1 second. I will start it. Thumbs up if you can hear it.
Sometimes the journey chooses you and not the other way around. I don't know how, but I just knew that you would lead me to sacred ground, sacred ground. I was living in a place that it was time for me to leave. I had lost all of my faith, but I was ready to believe. So where you go, I'll go. Where you live will be my home. I will walk with you until the day I die. It won't always be easy. It won't always be sweet. But that's all right, as long as you're with me. In the middle of the night, I went and laid down by your feet. I knew that if the time was right, you would welcome me. before the break of day. By then I knew that you would come to me. And where you go, I'll go. Where you live will be my home. I will walk with you until the day I die. It won't always be easy. It won't always be sweet. But that's alright, as long as you're with me. And all the people in the gate, and all the elders, they shall say, we are the witnesses today to this covenant you made. Generations pass, generations come, and now our separate histories are one. And where you go, I'll go. Where you live will be my home. I will walk with you until the day I die. It won't always be easy. It won't always be sweet. But that's alright, as long as you're with me. Yeah, that's alright, as long as you're with me.
Well, I'd love to know what you thought of the video, so please feel free to put any comments in the chat. And I don't know if it touches your heart the way it touches mine, but to me, it's a reminder of those very first lines we hear in the first chapter about what Ruth says to Naomi: where you go, I will go, your people will be my people, your God will be my God, and where you die, I will die. And I think, to me, one of the most important things of this book is nothing that we talked about already, but that it talks about relationships. Now, first of all, of course, this is a daughter-in-law with her mother-in-law. So for one, I'd love for you to reflect on what your own relationships are, if you have any in-laws in your life. I know some people don't say in-law, they say in love. So throw that out to you. I know that in my own family, my husband doesn't call my mother by her first name, but calls her mom. And I call my mother-in-law Ma. And then on the other hand, my sister-in-law calls my mother her first name. So it doesn't mean they don't get along well or anything, but it's just about these relationships. Obviously, we learn about the difference between Orpah and Ruth. And so much in our text teaches us also about the relationship that we have. But when I watch that video and I think about it again, I really hear the relationship with God. Not just that your God will be my God, but I love the language that Alicia Jo Robbins uses, because it really does say, you'll be with me. And I think it brings up this whole other piece. And Rabbi Goldwasser, we talked about the text and the law and how ultimately it works out for both Ruth and Naomi. It talks about, you know, this horrible tragedy. We don't get too many details. We don't know how the husband dies. We don't know how the sons die, but we know that they're coming together, almost a sense of faith. And we don't always talk about all of that, but there's this, with the law even being problematic somewhat, wouldn't you agree that there's an element of faith in our practice and faith in the tradition and faith in the law, that ultimately, even if Naomi says, I'm bitter, so call me Mara, but she still has faith that this is going to work out. And in the end, you see that Naomi, who said, I have no more sons in my body, she still got to be like another parent to this baby.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the end, the book of Ruth is a story that sends the message. The law isn't just there to be blindly obeyed. The law is there to bring people together, for them to find their own deepest meaning in one another. For Naomi to discover that she isn't empty. She isn't empty because she has people in her life who love her and care about her and who are loyal to her. And that sometimes even trumps the law.
A beautiful way for us to kind of end on that note, which is, I hope that this is a call to us to not only study and enjoy the study, and I hope you've enjoyed this class and all the other ones that you've attended, but let this also be a call to us to treasure the relationships that we have in our life and to hold on to them, and to know that sometimes family doesn't have to come by blood, and that these relationships can be very powerful. And another reminder of looking into the text to understand other texts. I know I speak for myself, I'm sure for you as well, Rabbi Goldwasser. It is a blessing to learn with all of you, those of you whom we can call our own congregants and those whom we don't know. And I hope that we'll be sending out a survey. I'll talk with Rabbi Bernholz. We'd love to hear what you liked. We'd love to hear any suggestions for future topics, or making sure that this is the right time of day to be doing this for everyone. And just want to thank you all. We wish you a Chag Sameach. And as you get ready to study more, I hope on Shavuot, maybe you'll take another look at Ruth. Feel free to share with both Rabbi Goldwasser and myself any of your takeaways. We'd love to have those as well. And just again, it's been a pleasure to not only count the days with you, but hopefully we've helped you make those days count.
Thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful.